Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 23rd of August of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And summarizing everything, summarizing every single report we've been receiving since the beginning of this week, since the beginning of the Kursk offensive operation, we can make a conclusion that tomorrow, on the 24th of August, the Russians are planning to conduct a strike of revenge. We got reports from different Russian military authorities and authorities themselves. For example, the Russian ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Antonov, stated today that Putin has made a decision on how to respond to the attack on the Kursk region. Kyiv expects severe punishment. Furthermore, we got additional reports from very powerful countries. Let's talk about the Chinese report. The Chinese embassy in Kyiv is urging its citizens to avoid traveling to Ukraine due to fears of massive Russian attacks on Ukraine's Independence Day this Saturday. Yes, I'll remind you that tomorrow, on the 24th of August, is the Independence Day of Ukraine. And according to the Russians and many sources and different intelligence, this is the best time when the Russians can attack Ukraine due to the situation in the Kursk region. Furthermore, we got additional statements from the United States. The U.S. embassy urges U.S. citizens to depart Ukraine now using privately available ground transportation options if it is safe to do so. So most likely tomorrow the Russians are going to attack Ukraine, all over the entire territory of Ukraine, including energy facilities, and some sources are saying that the Russians are planning to attack the government block inside of Kyiv. Furthermore, I'll remind you that during the previous few days, during the previous weeks, the Ukrainians were doing everything they can to destroy the Russian airfields. So basically, the Ukrainians were targeting the Russian aircraft facilities. For example, in this video, we can see the result of one of the Ukrainian strike along the territory of Russia. As a result of attack, the Ukrainians managed to completely destroy the airfield in the vicinity of the city by the name of Oktyabrski. They destroyed ammo depots, airfields, and so on. As you can see, another very heavy explosion just in front of your screens. And today we got fresh and with very high quality satellite pictures of this airfield. And the Ukrainian sources managed to calculate the number of aircrafts that were destroyed. And according to the Ukrainians, a big number of Su-24, Su-34 were destroyed. Furthermore, just during the previous week, the Ukrainians conducted an attempt to attack airfields in the northern part of Russia in the vicinity of Murmansk. In this case, they were using the drone, and that in this case, as talking about this case, the Russians managed to destroy this drone as a result of air defense. But I'm just trying to tell you that for the previous few weeks, the Ukrainians were trying to destroy as many as possible Russian airfields and as many as possible Russian fuel depots. And the purpose of those attacks was to destroy Russian possibilities to attack Ukraine with missiles during the Independence Day. But once again, summarizing everything, the Ukrainians haven't managed to achieve this goal. And most likely tomorrow, Russia is going to attack Ukraine. But this is not the most important update. We understand that sooner or later, the Russians would attack Ukraine as an act of revenge. The most important that tomorrow is Independence Day, and most likely tomorrow, Ukrainians, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, are planning to start using F-16s. F-16s, most likely the Ukrainians are planning to use F-16s as air defense. They will try to destroy and to bring down Russian missiles and Russian drones that the Russians are planning to use during the Independence Day. And of course, the Ukrainians will try to make this work of F-16s as some kind of significant victory and media victory. They will show the best results ever of air defense, most likely. But on the other hand, there are very high chances that Ukrainians will try to use F-16s not just as an air defense source, but also an attempt to bring down Russian strategical aviations like Tu-22 or Tu-95 that the Russians are going to use for the launching of the cruise missiles. So most likely tomorrow is going to be a very interesting day, and most likely tomorrow we're going to see F-16s in action. Now let's move to the line of combat contact, and first let's talk about the Pokrovsk direction. We continue receiving a lot of updates, a lot of geolocations, and lots of videos from the line between Zhelanda Druge and the city of Krasnogorovka. I'll remind you that during the previous days the Russians established complete control over the main part of the city, and due to the geolocations and videos we start receiving from the main supply road, we understand that the Russians are planning to finish the battle for the city as soon as possible and to announce lost the complete control over the city during another Russian Ministry of Defense report. So as you can see in this video, we can see several Ukrainian vehicles that were destroyed and damaged by the Russian FPV drones. And we are receiving the videos from the same area for 2 days in a row. So a lot of vehicles were destroyed exactly in this point. Now let's move further and let's talk about the original Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, we got updates that the Russians renewed or resumed or began full-scale offensive operation to the west. The Russians are attacking and storming Ukrainian positions on the line Nikolaevka-Mikhailovka. So according to different mappers and according to different sources, the Russians have already entered the village of Mikhailovka. There are very heavy clashes among the buildings and the first streets of the village, but yet we haven't received any geolocation that can confirm this. Anyway, as for this attack, we see that the Russians decided to avoid, let's say, a strict attack to the landfill. First of all, the Russians decided to, let's say, to go through this landfill from the south and then to cut this landfill from supply and support, and maybe then they will try to storm this area. As for Novohrodivka itself, today we got very important geolocations. In this video we can see how the Russian soldiers and the Russian troopers began clearing this area, and the Russian troopers were dropping grenade inside of the building. The video was made by the Russian drone, and this video confirms that not just this building the Russians were planning to secure, but most likely the buildings around were secured by the Russians during the previous, let's say, few hours when the clashes were taking place. So summarizing everything from this video, we have made changes on the map, and we have added additional territory under complete Russian control. So we have geolocation that confirms Russian entrance in this part of the city, but according to different mappers, according to different pro-Russian resources, the Russians also entered the territory of Novohrodivka from the southern part of the city. So currently there are very heavy clashes in the area, and if Ukrainians lose Novohrodivka, this is going to be a disaster for them, because after Novohrodivka the Russians will enter the operational space and they will be able, without any resistance and without any problems, to move further in the western direction towards the city of Pokrovsk from the south, and this is going to be a disaster for the Ukrainians. The Russians will be able to cut the main supply roads and to cut Pokrovsk and Selidova in two. Now let's move further. According to information we have and according to different mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly in the vicinity and around the cities or villages of Krutoy Yar and Krasny Yar, and some Russian mappers reported that this territory was captured by the Russians during the previous 24 hours. Obviously, significant progress of the armed force of Russian Federation. By this attack, the Russians are also attacking the village of Nikolaevka, and they try to cut this area into as well. The Russians want to cut the supply road between Mirnograd and Hrodivka, where the Russians are advancing as well. According to information we have, the Russians have established complete control over more than 70% of the city, and there are just a few streets left under Ukrainian control. Most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back towards the line of the strongholds. We are talking about this territory. The city of Hrodivka is about to be captured by the Russians, and this might happen during this upcoming weekend or maybe during the tomorrow's Independence Day of Ukraine. Furthermore, we got just some videos from the city of Kamyshivka. In this video we can see the Russian flag that was raised by the Russian soldiers. We haven't received any reports about the Russian control over this territory, just the Ministry of Defense reported this, and now we have 100% proofs that the village was indeed captured by the Russians during the clashes during the previous few days. So significant progress by the Russians. They're moving further in the western direction, and the western media is in panic because they see that the main reason for Russian success in the Pokrovsk front is the exhaustion and shortage of Ukrainian soldiers, and the sources are saying that Kremlin is close to crushing a vital Ukrainian town, and the western media is talking about the city of Pokrovsk. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Toretsk direction, where the Russians are also advancing. During the previous 24 hours they managed to improve their position significantly. Let's talk about the line Zalizny-Toretsk itself. During the previous day we got additional geolocations that confirm Russian progress inside of the city of Toretsk, and that the Russians managed to enter the stronghold from the southern direction. Let's take a look at this video, and in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking the Russian forces. And for example, take a look at this building. I would like to point your attention to the shape of this building. And when the Ukrainians published the video, the building was geolocated very fast, and this is the school number 2 of Toretsk, and the Ukrainians were bombing this territory with artillery and FPV drones, which confirms that this area is in the complete Russian control. So we have enough of geolocations to adjust the map and to show additional Russian progress. Furthermore, according to different mappers, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, pro-Russian sources, and neutral sources, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the citadel, this area, and we have adjusted this territory. Furthermore, the sources are saying that Ukrainian troops have withdrawn from their positions in the high-rise building in the east of Dzerzhinsk. Ukrainian name is Toretsk, and as you can see, the Ukrainians are not able to hold the lines. And now, according to information we have, the Ukrainians are trying to create the defense belt along the two Terikons and the citadel between them. So this is the first Ukrainian stronghold, the coal mine and the landfill behind it. We have the residential area with high-rising buildings, and we have the landfill and the coal mine in the northern part of Toretsk. So this is the main defense belt of Ukrainian armed forces, where they will try to slow down the Russians. But the problem is that within the next few days we expect the renewal of Russian offensive operation along the railways towards the village of Shcherbinovka, and most likely the Russians within the next few days will establish complete control over the city of village of Druzhba, and they will move further in the direction of Delivka. With these two attacks, the Russians will be able to cut the last supply roads and last supply lines the Ukrainians are using to hold their lines in Toretsk. And if the Russians are able to do this, the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back, otherwise they will be encircled and captured by the Russians. Now let's move further. As for the Chasiv Yar, we haven't received anything, just a regular activity. The one thing that I would like to point your attention is that the video that we've just seen from the Hrodivka itself about the assault operation, this one was published by the Russian AT's division, and this division used to fight in Chasiv Yar direction. They were fighting for the Hromova, for all these villages, for the cemetery, and many other blocks and territories of the Chasiv Yar direction. Now we see that this unit was redeployed to the Pokrovsk direction, which confirms our statements in the past that activity of the Russians in the Chasiv Yar was reduced significantly after the beginning of the Kursk offensive operation. As for the Siversk direction, we haven't received anything special, just a regular activity. Now let's talk about the Kupiansk direction. In the southern Kupiansk direction, we have a very heavy clashes between the Ukrainians and the Russians. The Russians are advancing in Makiivka, and today we got additional geolocations that were published by the Ukrainians. In this video we can see a series of Ukrainian FPV drone attacks on the Russian forces in the central part of Makiivka, and based on this video we have adjusted the map. Now we still haven't received the geolocations from this part of Makiivka. According to different mappers, this territory also was captured by the Russians. In the north, a little bit further in the northern direction, we have the video that was published by the 3rd Azov Brigade. Yesterday announced they made a media announcement about very important and very significant victory of the armed forces of Ukraine, that they managed to recapture additional positions, lots of trenches, fortifications on the strongholds, and to force the Russians to fall back. Today on the 23rd of August, we got details about those attacks. According to pro-Ukraine mappers, the Ukrainians managed to establish complete control over these forests and these tree lines, and we have geolocation that confirmed this. So the Ukrainians recaptured this territory and got as close as possible to Novohrodivka, Karamzinovka, and to the supply road between the cities along the river of Zhiribets. And I'm not sure the real, let's say, expectations from the Ukrainian side and their real goals. Maybe that was just a media victory to show the Ukrainians that everything is under control, and that Kursk is not the only region where the Ukrainians are advancing. But as for the real value of this attack, I'm not sure about this attack at all, because the main Russian forces are advancing to the west of Tabaevka and Pishane, and today we got report from different mappers and different sources that the Russians managed to improve their positions to the west of Tabaevka and to the north of Pishane, and that the Russians captured these fields and the tree lines in front of the Oskol River. Obviously, significant progress of the armed force of of Russian Federation. The situation for the Ukrainians to the west of Kislovka-Kotlarovka is getting worse and worse, and most likely, due to this configuration of the line of combat contact, the Ukrainians soon would be forced to fall back to the north in Peshane. The Russians, according to this report, according to this configuration, have improved their positions along Oskol River to 7 kilometers, which is already enough to begin broad frontline full-scale offensive operations to the river of Oskol, to the cities along Oskol River like Glushovka, like Kolesnikovka, and like Kruglakovka itself. So something big may happen in the very near future. As for the northern Kupiansk direction itself, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions and forces, mainly trying to destroy and to reduce the Ukrainian logistic. So as for the changes on the ground, the Russians still haven't begun any offensive, haven't started anything in this direction, and most likely that the Russians are, for now, are not planning to do anything in this part. They are planning to improve their positions in this part. Now let's talk about the Kharkiv area. During the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians tried to restore their positions, their lost positions to the north of Liptsi. They were attacking the Russian forces in the Gluboka and in the residential part of the northern part of Liptsi, but those attacks were repelled by the Russians. I'll remind you that during the previous few days there were reports that the Russians the Russians captured the positions of armed forces of Ukraine in the northern part, and now the Ukrainians were trying to restore these lost positions. And the Russians published videos of how they were attacking and destroying Ukrainian vehicle. Those vehicles, armored personnel carriers that Ukrainians were using in those counterattacks. So the Ukrainians were completely defeated, suffered losses, and were forced to fall back. The Russians are going to move further in the southern direction. Now let's talk about the Kursk direction. We have additional reports and updates. And the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces along the border. The Russian reconnaissance drones walk 24 hours, 7 days a week. They try to discover and to understand where exactly the Ukrainians are planning to conduct the next offensive operations, and whether the Ukrainians are planning to do this at all. And today we got some changes on the ground. As a result of clashes, the Russians managed to restore their positions in the village of Spalne. This village used to be under complete Ukrainian control, and this is, telling the truth, the most effective Russian direction, because during the previous 2 weeks the Russians managed to restore control first over the village of Giri, then over the village of Kamyshina, then over the village of Kripets, and now the Russians began counteroffensive in the village of Spalne. Most likely during the next few days the Russians will restore control over this entire territory, and the battle for Borky is going to begin. So we see that the Russians are moving, and most likely the Russians managed to achieve these results because of combination of work of Russian intelligence, Russian aviation, and the forces on the ground. Now let's move further and let's talk about the hottest point in the Kursk offensive operation, and we are talking about the city of Ruskaya Konopelka. According to information we have, most likely the Ukrainians managed to establish complete control over the southeastern part. The Russians control the central and the northwestern part. There are still very heavy clashes. The Ukrainians moved significant number of armored vehicles inside of the village, and then the Ukrainians abandoned these vehicles, and now the Russians are destroying it. We have a lot of geolocations that confirm Ukrainian presence inside of these small buildings in this part of the southeastern part of the village, which confirms that most likely this part of the village is under complete Ukrainian control. If we continue receiving updates from the same territory, we will adjust the map in Ukrainian favor. As for the northern direction, we have some changes on the ground. The Russian sources published the video how they managed to discover another Ukrainian convoy that was moving through the village of Kositsa, and the Russians destroyed this convoy with FPV drone strikes. This video confirms that Kositsa is under complete and strong control of the armored forces of Ukraine. So we have adjusted and we have added this block under Ukrainian control. The Ukrainians continue attempts to establish complete control over the village of Malaya Loknya, the former prison of women prison, but the Russians hold their lines. During the previous 24 hours we got reports about significant attacks from the Ukrainian side with the use of significant number of troopers and forces. Most of those attacks were repelled. The Ukrainians suffered losses and were forced to fall back. As for the western direction, we started receiving updates from different mappers, from different sources, that as a result of counterattacks the Russians managed to restore complete control over the village of Korineva, that located on the Ukrainian side of the river Seym, or of the river by by the name of Skrepna. So summarizing everything, summarizing reports we received, the Russians currently control this part. For now, we are not changing the map because we are waiting for additional proofs either from some reliable mappers or either we got some reports or geolocations from the ground, but we're just keeping this information in mind that most likely the Russians restore control over this territory. And now the Russians began counter-offensive in direction of Olgovka. There are very heavy clashes, the Ukrainians suffer significant losses, but the Ukrainians are bringing more and more forces here, and everything is under complete Russian attack with different drones, with the Lancet and so on. So we got a lot of videos that confirms that the Russians are counter-attacking and that the Russians dealing significant damage to the Ukrainians. Now let's talk about the western direction. We have some changes on the ground. Today the Russian sources published the video of how they were FPV droning the Ukrainians in the village of Krasno-Oktyabrskaya. This video confirms that at least this part of the village is under complete Ukrainian control, and based on this video we have adjusted the map. On the other side we see that Ukrainians continue bombing and attacking the Russian positions, and we see that Ukrainians are intensifying the artillery strikes. More, not just artillery strikes, the Ukrainians began using MiG-29 with hammer bombs and with the United States analog. So something like FAB 250 and FAB 500. For example, in this video we can see more strikes from the Ukrainian side. They were bombing the Russian strongholds and the Russian positions. This is something like artillery and aviation preparation. Most likely within the next few days the Ukrainians will attack, and probably the Ukrainians will begin their offensive. They will try to begin their offensive during their Independence Day, like to show the Ukrainians that the Ukraine is very strong and they still have possibilities to attack. They control, they have the initiative in this direction, and they will try to do everything they can to improve their positions. Furthermore, we got additional reports from the village of Hrodivka. In this video we can see that the Russian FPV drones were attacking the Ukrainian positions. If you remember, in May or in the late April the Russians captured the village and they published video, and now we see that Ukrainians most likely restore control over the village, and that means that Ukrainians are getting closer and closer to the village of Tyotkina, and they will soon try to cross the border and to begin the clashes inside of the village itself. As you can see, we receive a lot of updates, but once again the most important things are going to begin tomorrow during the Independence Day of Ukraine. The sources are saying that the Russians are going to bomb not just the energy facilities, warehouses and so on. The Russians are going to conduct an attack on the Ukrainian government office, Ukrainian parliament, Ukrainian president office. They will show the Ukrainians, they will show Zelensky and the Western authorities that the Russians are very angry, and they will do everything they can to stop Ukraine and to stop the special military operation, and obviously in Russian favor. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, share my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.